Good morning, everyone. We'll start today's subcommittee on state administration meeting as a subcommittee. And we will start with Governor's proposal on the civil service. If we can have you folks come up. Thank you. And before you start, I just want to make one housekeeping item. We're moving tomorrow's meeting to 1:30 p.m. from the scheduled 10 a.m. time due to the conflict with Senate subcommittee hearing at the same time. So we're going to do it a bit later. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Erica Lee, and I'm with the Department of Finance. I'm here to present on the Governor's proposal for the civil service improvement effort. So the main revision includes several proposals that are part of what we're calling the civil service improvement effort. This effort is spearheaded by the Government Operations Agency along with Secretary Maribel Badger and includes numerous work groups whose goals are essentially to dissect the civil service system, looking for ways to broadly reach the aim of creating a nimble and flexible civil service system, ensuring practical, transparent, and efficient processes, and recruiting and retaining a world-class workforce. The proposals before you are some of the initial steps down that path. I'm happy to explain what these proposals are and then happy to address your questions, the committee's questions. So the first proposal is eliminating a statute concerning vacant positions that both our department and the LAO have cited for many years as being ineffective and overly bureaucratic. It's Government Code 12439, which requires the elimination of positions left vacant for 6 or more consecutive months. The original intent was to maintain accurate numbers of authorized positions. However, in a recent audit performed by our department, the majority of departments sampled were found to have either misapplied or circumvented the law, so holding open vacant positions that should have been swept and likely using that funding to deal with other budgetary priorities. So the audit report made several recommendations, including the elimination of Government Code 12439 and replacing it with a process that provides monitoring of and greater transparency into departments' budgets. The positive outcomes of eliminating this code are that department HR shops across the state can now more fully address their actual workload. Yes. Did you have a question?
I said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bless you. So HR shops across the state can really deal with the workload that they ought to be dealing with, and not attempting to shield positions that are left vacant in order for that department to deal with their other workload issues. And generally, departments don't have to worry about losing positions as they attempt to juggle their priorities. Our audit finding also included replacing the code with a better process, and that leads to our second proposal. This replacement process is described at a high level in our second proposal, which is on page 17 of your agenda and deals with replacement of Control Section 411. The new monitoring process will be a biannual reconciliation. We'll begin this fall looking at departments' budgets. Specifically, what we'll do is we will take the average of the last 3 years a department has been what they have been spending on certain categories, specifically their personnel and their operations budget categories. And the operations is generally what we refer to as OE&E, kind of what it takes to keep the lights on in a department, rent, utilities, supplies, equipment, certain contracts, et cetera. So we're going to use that department's historical data and actually use that as a baseline to create their budgets for the following governor's budget in 16-17. So it's important to note that we won't be sweeping positions, we won't be augmenting or taking dollars away from department budgets. The legislature has approved a set of authorized positions, and we're not going to touch those. But rather, we're going to be reviewing what a department is actually spending in these categories on both personnel and OE&E. And we want to more accurately reflect what that dollar amount is in budgets for the following year. So if a department has been holding a lot of vacant positions open or vacant positions to use that funding for operational expenses, we want to know about it and assist that department in sort of right-siding their budgets. And really, the value of the replacement process is twofold. One is that it will provide greater transparency. So you will know, as a stakeholder, the legislature will know where departments are spending their dollars, either in personnel or this OE&E. And secondly, departments, this should assist departments who, in reality, they do have to juggle where they spend their money and how they make decisions on priorities. They shouldn't have to lose positions that they've had to hold open to address priority issues in maybe another category. And this is what we will be doing biannually, kind of a true-up or a reconciliation of department budgets on a biannual basis. That describes what's probably the most substantive of the code changes. Before continuing on, I can answer committee questions, or I can continue describing.
Sure. I'm just, first and foremost, I love this idea. I very much appreciate the fact that the governor's office has been working on this diligently. Can you explain a little bit about the process that you've gone through? What agencies maybe you looked at, which ones you held as control groups, or did you do it on what was the process you put into place? Did you look at all agencies involved or just a subset?
Sure. Are you speaking about the particular audit? Yes. Okay. So our Office of State Audits and Evaluations is part of the Department of Finance, and they looked at 10 departments. I don't have all those names with me currently, but what they did was they looked at a sampling of departments to see what their HR practices were as it concerns the implementation of GC and the compliance really with GC 12439, which basically states that all departments have vacant positions that have been left vacant for 6 or more months. Essentially, they need to sweep those positions. And as I stated, the intent of that exercise was really to have a better sense of, what are the authorized positions that are out there, what's the need of a department. In reality, it wasn't really addressing the needs of the departments, and departments were finding ways to, deal with their workload and also deal with this statute, and sometimes, not complying with it because they had other priority issues that they needed to fund, and so they were keeping vacant positions open, using those dollars in other categories. So as a result of that audit, in order to really get at the intent of what it was there for, was to help departments, and we felt to, to be more transparent in how departments budget, we needed to replace that code, which was, as I stated, pretty ineffective and definitely overly bureaucratic. The audit found that HR shops were spending a lot of time doing things outside of what I would term their real work to deal with efforts to save these vacant positions. Mm-hmm. Okay. And moving on, there are other sets of codes that we're proposing for elimination, specifically having to do with hiring and the ability of departments to hire. There are currently laws that really limit the candidate pool from which departments can hire from, and there's actually, to go back to maybe your former question and to sort of broaden it, Mr. Nazarian, there are dozens of work groups out there looking at how how practices are, how we're conducting practices from hiring and recruiting to developing and training. And so there is a group looking at hiring practices, which includes SPB and CalHR, and they've identified certain statutes that are out there that do limit departments from being able to hire the best potential candidates. And as one of the goals of the civil service improvement is really to hire and retain a premier workforce, then we felt this was important to, get rid of some of these what I would call archaic statutes that limit departments' ability to hire. And so there are, and I can go into each one of them if you like, but there are essentially 4 of these that we're either proposing to eliminate and or amend. So it allows departments to have greater flexibility in who they can hire. Mm-hmm.
If you want to touch on it very briefly.
Sure. So, and I can be pretty brief on this. There is such a law that we refer to as a rule of 3 names, and this statute generally limits departments to choose from only the top 3 names on promotional hiring list. So if they if there's a candidate on there who might be really good for that position, but they're not the top 3 scorers on that list, then they are not reachable. So we're proposing eliminating that code. Another code is what is referred to as the managerial 6 ranks. And that is for managerial lists. There is this kind of scoring scheme that departments have to use where they rank all of the people who are on that list in 6 ranks. However, according to another statute called the Rule of 3 Ranks, you can only reach or hire off of the first 3 ranks, which means people in ranks 4, 5, and 6, again, if they are really good, you still can't reach them. They've passed, but they just haven't passed into the ranks 1, 2, or 3. So we're proposing elimination of that rule. Another one is called the Rule of 1 Rank. Departments are limited to choose from only those individuals who, when they score high enough to fit in that first rank. And again, so limiting anybody else who's outside of that rank from even being considered for hire. Those are the 3 codes that we're proposing to eliminate. And we also have another code or several codes actually, that are included in the agenda that we are proposing amending that would allow the expansion of the pool of possible candidates who can apply for promotional positions or career executive assignment examinations. So again, the whole goal is to get rid of some of those limiting factors and increase the eligible pool of candidates for positions within the state.
Mr. Wolk?
Yeah, so I had a question on the first one on the ring of 3. So is it open-ended, or is it you're expanding it to 6, or?
So the default would be the rule of 3 ranks then. So you would actually have the ability to go beyond just the 3 names of the highest scores. So it's still, the default for these would be you would be able to expand your pool.
But how much?
So whoever is eligible, who basically takes a hiring examination and has passed, they can be put into certain ranks. And these ranks are, the department can decide what that percent is in terms of that rank. So they can decide if it's like 70, 80, or 90% where an individual falls in that rank. So generally allowing, the rule of 3 names is just three people. But if you're expanding to 3 ranks, and those 3 ranks are based on how you believe you should be scoring that test, you can see that you would be expanding that pool of candidates to include anybody in ranks 1, 2, and 3.
I could see a potential for abuse as well, though. That's why it's one of these balancing acts. I understand what the goals are, but I also can see where all of a sudden you may, by expanding it, you may actually not end up achieving what we would like to see achieved. So I was just curious on that. Okay. So it's going to be based upon what they want to, what the criteria that they set. Sure,
and the criteria are set before people sit for the exams. So, the idea is that you would be impartial in how you're scoring these, the criteria by which you're scoring individuals who take these exams. Mm-hmm. Okay. And thirdly, our last civil service improvement proposal concerns limited-term positions. So for many years, departments have attacked short-term work with limited-term funding and limited-term positions. In reality, we have heard time and time again from departments that it is extremely difficult for them to fill these positions. And once they're able to get somebody in the door, those people know that job is limited to 2 years, and they're generally looking for a way into a permanent position. And this ultimately has negative impacts on departments' daily operations and the success of their programs. So in the May revision, we are proposing eliminating the use of limited-term positions. Instead, we will support limited-term funding, limited-term spending authority, which will act as a control on the actual number of positions that a department can fill at any point. They couldn't necessarily fill beyond that number in terms of dollar amount. So what this means on a practical level is that departments are given the ability to decide how to best use that limited bucket of money to address their workload. And ultimately, there are tools out there that they can choose from. They can hire into their vacant positions. So if they have vacant positions open, they want to hire somebody to do that work, they can fill those vacant positions. They can hire people into what we call the blanket and then move them once there are permanent positions that open up in the department. They can administratively establish positions for a fiscal year, or if necessary, and if they can justify it, they can request permanent positions that, along with the limited term funding. And essentially what would happen in that case is that at the end of the time in which the bucket expires, because it is short-term funding, a department would be responsible for having to move those people that they hired, because they were permanent, into vacant spots, or through attrition reduce that total number. But essentially it gives departments both the tool and the responsibility, really, to manage their resources, their people resources. And also, we're not eliminating the actual statutes behind limited term positions. So even though we as an administration will not put forward limited term positions, departments have the flexibility to still hire into a permanent position a limited term assignment. So if that's necessary, these are the tools that departments currently have to address their workload, both short-term and long-term. And again, as I stated, the reality is that departments are having a difficult time filling these LT positions, limited-term positions. And so they are making permanent hires into limited-term positions. So a lot of this is happening already, and what we'd like to do is to give departments more flexibility in addressing their workload as they see best. By giving them a pool of dollars to address a short-term issue, they decide how they want to manage meeting their goals.
If I can interrupt you for a minute, I was trying to not interrupt you, and I wanted to be done at least with this item. But since we have a member who has a conflicting calendar right now, why don't we take a roll call to establish quorum, and then you can continue.
Okay.
So,
Nazarian.
present.
Wilk.
Present.
Mullen. Cooper. Allen.
See you shortly. Thank you. Thank you. Please continue.
I'm actually almost done. So when combined with the biannual reconciliation process that I spoke about earlier, we really believe that the use of limited term positions does give departments the flexibility to, again, handle the issues and their workload as they see fit. We believe that we're giving departments ability to manage their own workload, and this is a broader goal of civil service improvement, that, understanding departments are not cookie cutters and giving them the tools that they need to address their workload. And the goal of these combined proposals is to really give departments their discretion, flexibility to hire, manage, and run their programs, but balanced with some controls and monitoring, because that's appropriate as well. So again, I'm happy to respond to any other questions the committee may have.
Thank you. LAO?
Jason Cisney with the LAO. Administration deserves a lot of credit for taking on these issues. The changes to the civil service really, in some respects, mirror items that our office has been bringing up for many years about how to make the state's hiring process more flexible and more successful at attracting and keeping the best qualified people for the job. With regard to the vacant position law that the administration mentions, we have agreed for some time the law really is the worst of both worlds. It's ineffective and bureaucratic, and it probably can't be salvaged. The existing law probably just needs to be scrapped altogether. But the challenge is what to replace these issues, these laws, and the current procedures with in all of these cases. So our overarching concern with this item is that the May revision is not a very good process to deal with issues of this magnitude, though sometimes the legislature has to. And with regard to the civil service issues in particular, while the process may have some merit that the administration proposes, it could give a lot of flexibility to departments. And the issue would be, how exactly would a process be drawn up where the legislature would be able to effectively monitor and push departments in another direction if they weren't filling the positions that the legislature thought was important to be filled in a particular program. So I think that these proposals have a lot of merit, but we would urge you to consider what's the right process here to ensure that the legislature continues to have appropriate oversight over departmental hiring.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so I have a question, because I agree with everything you just said. So is it appropriate to do it through this process, or is this something we should do longer term through a policy committee? I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that it's really up to the legislature. And certainly at May revision, we oftentimes deal with pretty big issues. That's just kind of how the process works. These are really big issues, though, that affect, members of all of our nearly 24 state bargaining units and managers throughout civil service. So I think that one option would be to urge the administration to come back next January, either to go through the budget process, the whole budget process, or to seek a bill author to pursue these goals through the regular policy process. As I said, I think there are a lot of good things here, but I think that in the amount of time left at the May revision, we're just not sure there's a way to draw up this process to ensure that the legislature really has its appropriate oversight role intact.
Thank you.
Any public comments? Great. We're going to be holding this item open. Thank you so much. Next is issue number 2, employee compensation.
Good morning, David Munoz, Department of Finance. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the proposal before you requests to modify the current JLBC notification and review process for side letter agreements for an approved memorandum of understanding. To give you a little bit of background as some context, and as you're all aware, current statute requires the administration and the collective bargaining units to meet and confer in good faith over salary, benefits, and other terms and agreements of their work. And out of that will, the final product would be a memorandum of understanding that ultimately the legislature would ratify and the governor would sign. And in addition to that, current statutes also allow the administration and the collective bargaining units to amend their existing MOU through a side letter or addenda process. Side letters come in all shapes and sizes. Some are very simple, such as changing the way a particular bargaining unit uses their timesheets. Some are much more complex than that, such as closing down an entire facility and having to redirect thousands of employees to other places. The current process for notifying and reviewing a side letter from the JLBC's perspective is that they look at the side letter and determine if it would cause an expenditure of funds that are not currently or already appropriated in the budget. And if, in fact, that side letter would cause expenditure of funds that have not already been appropriated in the budget, they would require the administration to seek legislative ratification either through a bill or some other legislative process. The problem that we've run into, the administration has, is that there are times throughout the year, specifically in the current year, when we are required to implement an operational change, most likely pursuant to a court case, and the administration is unable to implement because the legislature is out of session and we are unable to achieve that or seek that ratification of that side letter. What our proposal is attempting to achieve, or would achieve, is that we would have a criteria for which a side letter could be implemented without legislative ratification under very specific criteria. The criteria would be that any costs associated with the side letter would have to be less than $1 million. It would have to be absorbable within current appropriation authority, and that also the side letter does not substantially change the existing program. In addition to that, our proposal would also narrow the scope for which JLBC notification is required. Specifically, the Department of Finance would review each side letter and determine if it would create an expenditure of funds. If it did not create an expenditure of funds, then the JLBC would not be notified. We would be able to implement, and the side letter and appropriate documents would be placed on the CalHR's website. In the event that the side letter does cost money, we would, or expenditure of funds, we would notify the JLBC and they would go through their normal review process, but also we would have the ability to implement that side letter if it meant the conditions that I just described previously. Lastly, our proposal would increase transparency by clarifying exactly what side letter documents need to be posted on the CalHR website, which would include the executed side letter, appropriate attachments, and then also any fiscal summary documents. With that said, I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Comments from LAO?
Our office has been involved in the MOU addendum process that exists today since 2005, when a bill was passed that changed the process. We think the administration's on the right track here, and this is a procedure that could give the administration more flexibility, could help implement agreements that unions and the executive branch agree to more expeditiously, and preserve legislative oversight. As discussed in the agenda, we've recommended a few modifications to try to, in our view, get that balance right between legislative oversight, public transparency, and flexibility for the administration. And as the legislature looks at this language over the next few weeks, we would suggest keeping that balance of priorities, making sure the legislature continues to have all the information that it needs.
Questions? Okay. This item is going to be held open, but generally I'm very supportive of this. I think it's a great idea to not have projects and programs be waiting contingent on approvals. And when we can come back and take a look at it, if there's a need to look at for any MOU to be looked at, so long as the process continues moving forward, I think it works out great for everyone involved. So thank you very much. Next item up is the control section 3.61.
Good morning. Eric Stern with the Department of Finance. This finance letter is a minor clarifying change related to the state's existing contractual obligation to pre-fund retiree health care on behalf of Bargaining Unit 5 CHP patrol members. We proposed this control section back in January, sort of as a way to automate and streamline the current process we have to make OPEB contributions right now, currently just on behalf of our patrol members. The control section was also introduced in the event, in anticipation in the event we expand pre-funding to other bargaining units. This provides a better framework than the current process, where we have a standalone item, which has created some difficulties with making budget projections and estimates of how much money we need to flow to the OPEB trust fund. I just want to note a couple quick things. This control section in and of itself does not expand pre-funding. All it does, it's a budget mechanism that really facilitate transactions and increasing budget authority to departments through CalHR and the Controller's Office and Department of Finance. I just want to note that I know that the staff recommendation is to make a small language change that the LAO has recommended. But we'd have to oppose that, because when the control section is really designed to facilitate behind the scenes transactions with the controller's office, and the controller needs simple, clear directions on what sort of budget appropriation authority is exchanged between departments. The language that we used in this control section is exactly from the item 9800 provisions, long-standing provisions, and we've just copied that over into the control section. We're worried about making any changes that could sort of complicate issues and inject kind of policy issues into how we treat excluded employees into this, what we see as really truly a budget mechanism.
Okay. Comments from LAO?
as the agenda notes, we have some suggestions. Actually, our suggested language is modified slightly from what is in the agenda to be crystal clear. And actually, we're trying to be crystal clear for the controller. Pre-funding is the decision of the legislature. It is a decision that will affect state finances for the next 100 years or so. And so it's not something that should be done through this sort of obscure part of the budget bill. So our suggested language would make it clear that pre-funding through this section would happen in accordance with labor agreements approved by the legislature or other legislation approved by the legislature. In both cases, approved by the legislature. If further amendments to the control section are needed to make sure that the controller can execute the pre-funding transactions that the states already agreed to, we would be fine with those as well. But I think the goal here is to make sure that with regard to this very important decision of retiree health pre-funding, that there is no ambiguity. The legislature must be the one to decide it.
Okay. Questions? No? All right. Our recommendation is going to be to hold this item open then for the time being. Thank you for the presentation. And are there any public comments on this item? Thank you.